Hi, welcome back to Dish by RMU Culinary, a weekly installment where we show you delicious food. My name is Chef Brad with the Institute of Culinary Arts at Robert Morris University in Chicago. On this week's episode, we're showing you a classic soup. It's a beer cheese soup. We're so close to Wisconsin, the cheese capital of the Midwest, so we thought it'd be a really great, hearty winter soup to show you on a cold day. So to get started, we've got our classic mirepoix. Mirepoix is just a mixture of carrots, onions, and celery. And we need only half of an onion. These onions are big. So if you've got smaller onions, just do one small onion. And we're going to peel the onion and dice it. This soup is going to get pureed at the end. So you don't need to spend a whole ton of time making sure you have beautiful knife cuts. Just make sure they're all uniform so everything cooks at the same rate of speed, and that way you don't have some raw onions and some overcooked onions or carrots. So we're going to just do a quick small dice on half of an onion. And I've got one carrot. Again, this is a big carrot, so I'm only going to use half of it. I don't often peel carrots if I'm cooking them. Just give them a wash and then just dice them up. If you're going to use carrots on like a raw vegetable tray, then that's when I will spend some time peeling them just to make them look nicer. But there's a lot of flavor in the skin of carrots, so I like to keep that skin on if I can. Just wash it to get any dirt off of it. And then I've got one stalk of celery as well, and a clove of garlic. We're going to saute this like any soup. Starts by sauteing this mixture of vegetables, carrots, onions, and celery, and then we'll add in the rest of our ingredients for the soup. It's a really simple soup, not a lot of ingredients, just some really good products give you a really nice soup in the end. So I'm going to get a saucepan, heat it up. I've got about 4 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to melt that in the pan. And while that does, I'm going to smash 1 clove of garlic and give this a nice chop as well. And as your butter begins to melt in the pan, we can add in the carrots, onions, celery, and the garlic. We just want to sweat these. I don't want to get a lot of color on the vegetables. So I like to put, when I'm sweating vegetables, I like to put them in a cooler pan because I just want to pull out some of the moisture and soften them. What I don't want to do is really saute them to get some color on them, because that's going to affect the color of the soup. So I don't want a really hot pan because of that. So I'm going to season this with a little salt and pepper. And these will sweat for about 4 to 5 minutes. So once your vegetables have cooked for about 3 or 4 minutes, and the onions start to turn slightly translucent, so they start to get a little bit more clearness to the onion, then we're ready to move on to our next step. Again, we're not putting any color on our vegetables. I'm going to add in about 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, and we're doing this to make a roux, and it's going to help thicken our soup. And I want to cook this roux just for about 60 seconds, just to cook out that raw starchy flavor out of the flour. Roux is just one of a couple of different thickening agents that we add to soups or sauces to give them a little bit of body to them. Roux typically are a combination of fat and flour. In this case, the fat is butter. Once our roux cooks, then we're going to stir in 2 cups of stock. I'm using a vegetable stock, but if you wanted to, you can use chicken stock, which is totally fine for this. We're going to stir this in to get all that flour incorporated. And I'm also going to add in 1 12-ounce can of beer. You can use any kind of beer. I would recommend a lighter beer. It doesn't matter the amount of flavor. It could be a very full flavored, hoppy beer. I just would not suggest a porter or a stout. It's too dark of a beer for this soup. And we're going to simmer this now until the vegetables are completely tender. And then we're going to stir in some cheddar cheese and some heavy cream and puree the soup, and then it'll be completely done. This soup takes, less than 30 minutes to make from start to finish. So we're going to bring this to a simmer and let it simmer, and then we'll move on to the next step. So after your soup has simmered for about 15 or 20 minutes, and when the vegetables are tender, we're ready to move on to the next step. And if you'll notice, the soup is really nice and thick and velvety. So what we need to do now is add our cheese. And I have 3 cups of cheddar cheese. Whenever I'm adding cheese to a sauce, I'm always careful at the temperature of the liquid. Because if you add it and the liquid's too hot, then the cheese will get grainy and stringy and it won't melt in really nicely into the soup. So I always like to add cheese off the heat. So my soup is still hot, it was just simmering, and take it off the heat, and we're going to add in that 3 cups of cheddar cheese. And we're using a yellow cheddar. You're welcome to use a white cheddar. There's really no flavor difference between the two. It's just about the color. And again, when we're making something, we want to make sure that it presents nicely as well. So I like that yellow color in this soup. So we're going to stir this in. And I'm going to add in 1 cup of heavy cream. And we're going to season this with a little salt and pepper. Every time we add something to a soup, we want to season it to layer that flavor. And then the last step is to puree the soup. Because we want, I don't really like this soup to be a chunkier soup. I do like it to be smoother. So we're going to puree all those nice vegetables. Plus, the carrots and the onions will add some really nice sweetness to the soup itself once they're pureed. So I have an immersion blender. We're going to puree this with an immersion blender until it's smooth. Just be careful when you're using an immersion blender that you keep it submerged the whole time when the motor is running. If not, you'll be covered with soup. You can also, if you want to, use a regular blender, which if you don't have one of these immersion blenders, a regular blender will work just as well. When you are using a regular blender and you're dealing with hot soup, don't fill your blender up more than halfway, or the soup is going to explode and the heat in the blender is going to make the soup explode out of the top. So you can puree this as smooth as you want to. If you like a little bit of texture in the soup, then don't puree it super smooth. I want to get as much of those carrots and onions and celery chopped up as I can. That looks good. And as you puree the soup, especially when you're pureeing vegetables into the soup, it might thicken up a little bit. So I've got a little bit more cream. And just use some cream to adjust the consistency of the soup until it's as thin as you're looking for, or that you prefer with the soup. Okay? So that's beautiful soup right now. Great consistency, good texture. And so now we're ready to plate our dish. So we're going to bring it over here. And we've got a nice dark bowl set up. I think the color contrast between the light yellow soup and the dark bowl is going to be really great. So we're just going to ladle in. And you see those nice flecks of orange in the soup from the carrots. And you got that yellow cheesy soup. And I dripped on the bowl, so I'm going to grab a towel and just clean up the edges. Presentation counts, remember. And then to garnish this soup, I've got just some more of that shredded cheese so people know what's in it. And for color contrast, again, just some green scallions, which make that soup look really nice, and it pops in there. So there is our beer cheese soup. For recipes and more on dish, please visit robertmorris.edu/dish. We'll see you next week.